this keeps coming up over and over again. This will all just end if Hamas surrenders, releases the hostages and surrenders. This whole nightmare that Gaza is going through will therefore end, and therefore this is all Hamas's responsibility and no one else.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here, or at least two very important dimensions. The first one is basically, would Hamas surrender? And if they did, would that end armed resistance as an idea to challenge an occupation, a belligerent occupation, or even a military dictatorship at this point, and an apartheid system? As Israeli generals themselves now concede, Daniel Hagari, Admiral, spokesperson of the IDF, he says Hamas cannot be destroyed as an idea. It'll always be there. A lot of Israeli generals say it cannot be even destroyed as a group or a militant group or as a movement. But even if you concede that Hamas leaders would go out and say, okay, we surrender, drop your arms, would their own members in Gaza on the ground facing death, would they surrender? Would they agree to disarm? If you look at the situation with any armed conflict at all, Colombia, Northern Ireland, etc., there is no possibility for disarmament as a prerequisite to a political process. It always comes as the outcome of a process. That's why I think Jonathan Powell, who was the chief of staff of Tony Blair, he wrote a book about talking to terrorists in which he addressed the exact same point. He said the demand on Hamas to disarm or surrender before there's an end to the occupation is ludicrous. It's a non-starter. Nobody would agree to it whatsoever. Even if Hamas leaders agree to it, their militants on the ground would not agree to it. How do you disarm every single individual that believes there's no other path to freedom or life, basic life, other than this, because every other path has been blocked and proven to be futile by Israel? There's the other dimension, is basically that at the moment actually strengthens Hamas in the eyes of Palestinians. It's basically, what would happen if Hamas surrenders and you disarm every single militant of Hamas? What would Israel do the day after? Is it going to be kumbaya and Gaza thrives and the occupation ends in the West Bank? And Israel, the only thing they keep saying to Gaza, if Hamas is gone, we're going to reoccupy Gaza militarily. That's the moderate version. That's the Yoav Gallant, Benny Gantz version. Gaza under permanent Israeli military occupation on the ground. Gaza divided into four pieces. The Netzarim corridor, 20% of Gaza's area in the east, swollen by Israel's buffer zone. Another corridor now being built between Khan Yunis and Rafah, and a corridor between Gaza and Egypt. It's going to be under immense blockade, and with Israeli military able to raid it at free will, to mow the grass, cut the blades of anyone that tries to challenge the occupation or slow death, or in that case, even immediate death. That's one thing. The Netanyahu version is sliding towards controlling Gaza completely, which is what Yoav Gallant has been warning about, that we're going to end in a situation where the IDF controls Gaza's government and military security affairs at the same time. We're in full control, a dictatorship. And Gallant, the only reason why he opposes it, it's because it's going to drain the IDF and exhaust its resources and personnel. They don't have enough personnel for that kind of task. Then there's the version of Ben Gvir and Smotrich and a lot of voices on the right which say turn Gaza into a parking lot, a huge settlement, an Israeli settlement, and kick everybody out. So the versions that you get from the Israeli political mainstream, from the center to the far right, is a nightmare for Gaza. Gaza is going to be unlivable under Israeli control, where they can go in and out and kill whoever they want. You don't get any terms of surrender like Japan, of saying, you surrender, we do this massive reconstruction and bring back the economy in top shape, or Western Germany in that sense. You don't have a promise of prosperity or progress, which now positions Hamas actually as the last thing, the last force that is able to prevent Israel from full takeover and permanent presence inside Gaza. So there's in Gaza, there's a before Rafah and after Rafah. If you look at the Wall Street Journal, that article with Sinwar and other sources close to Hamas, they would say that up until the point where Israel invaded Rafah, there were dissenting voices in Hamas's top leadership. They were not fully unified. As soon as Israel invades Rafah, Hamas becomes more confident and more unified, because number one, it proved that Hamas is indestructible, because now Israel has taken over everything without being able to defeat them. And it proved that Israel has failed to find the hostages or kill Hamas's top leaders. They've now taken over all of Gaza without finding any of the hostages in Rafah. They kept promising the hostages are in Al-Shifa, no, in Khan Yunis, now in Rafah. They couldn't find a single one in Rafah itself or a single Hamas leader there. And they managed to portray a picture where they are Palestinians' only remaining army or only remaining barrier towards an existential threat of demise and kicking out the population. So that's why you don't have surrender. That even if Hamas contemplates it, the terms of surrender that Israel impose make the benefit of continuing the fight by far greater, much greater than laying down arms. But nonetheless, Hamas said recently, twice, they said, we are willing to disarm, lay down our arms if Israel ends the occupation. And our Qassam brigades, all of those militants, can be integrated into a Palestinian army or security force. We're not going to exist as a military force anymore if the occupation ends. But you have an Israeli mainstream where they were asked the questions, would you agree to ending the occupation if Saudi Arabia normalizes relations with Israel and the Arab world as well, and Hamas is disarmed, and this and this and that happened? And I think the poll that I'm aware of, the majority said no at the time. It was not appealing for them.